What's up, everybody? Ben Razza here for Odd Chopper, bringing you my best bet of the day. It is Saturday, October 22nd in the sports world. A fantastic day of sports. MMA in the morning, college football all day, NBA, everything that you could ask for, we've got on the schedule. We've looked at the lines. We've scanned the board. Got a pick that we're hoping is going to cash a ticket. If you've just found out about Odd Chopper, welcome aboard. This is what we do, all things betting, all sports, all the time. If you like what you see, you want to support us, hit the like button, subscribe to this very channel, join the community, check out what we've got going on across everything. Last night, got our college football, hopefully not a sign of things to come with UAB, because they did the old not one, not two, not three, 4 turnovers, and their quarterback got hurt, lost by 3 points in a very close game. They led into, throughout. Those are the bounces right now. Got to deal with them. We're going to get our fair share of, things that bounce our way, whether it's injuries, turnovers, things like that. Seen it many a times. We turn the page. Maybe today. Maybe we get 4 turnovers in this game. In addition, real quick, bet 10, win 200 at Bet MGM. Link in the description. If you're looking for extra money, if you say, I don't want to allocate my bankroll to a sport I don't play, this is a way to do it. Sign up. Deposit $10. Bet it on any NHL game, and no matter who you bet. It's got to be a money line. But regardless, once a team scores a goal in that game, they give you $200 in free bets. It is that simple. A great way to add some money, give you some more flexibility, take some shots. Where are we going today? A lot of good games, I'll be honest. I'm going to the Big Ten, going to Penn State. It's going to be ugly, 43.5-point total. Penn State, see, this is ticking up a little more and more, 5.5 now. This was 5 just a few minutes ago, but it's at minus 105, and that's okay. Let's get into it. This could be an intense game, but one I think Penn State has decisive advantages in. We'll start with Minnesota. They're 4-2. Not bad. Giving up only 11, nearly 12 points a game. That's a fantastic number. But let's dig into that number right off the bat. They're non-conference. New Mexico State, Western Illinois, which is an FCS team, and Colorado, who did somehow win a game. Those are 3 of the easiest non-con that you could play. So, of course, their numbers look really, really good. Last 2 weeks, they lost to Purdue. No shame in that, but they were at home and they were beaten somewhat decisively. And then they lost by 12 last week to Illinois. Not great, even though Illinois is much improved this year. Tanner Morgan, he's been there, it feels like, for a decade. Took a bad hit last week. His status is unknown for this game. Last week, they had 38 yards passing in the game and 3 interceptions. They cannot throw the ball. Morgan was ineffective. The backup was ineffective. They only have 1 out. It's to run the ball every single play. That is what they're going to try to do. It's not to say that they can't be successful doing that, but that is all they're going to do. And if Morgan misses the game on the road at night, that's going to be a major problem. A major problem. And we've seen this once the level of competition has increased. On the flip side, Penn State is 5-1. They beat Purdue on the road. So there's a little, I don't want to play the transitive property game, but they opened the season with an impressive win at Purdue, beat Auburn on the road. Last time out, they were destroyed by Michigan on the, that's a tough game. Michigan just ran it down their throat. This is the concern I have. Michigan racked up over 400 yards on the ground, but again, it's Michigan. It's a little different. This is in Beaver Stadium at night. I don't really correlate them much at all. So you've got, for Penn State, an experienced quarterback in Clifford. You got Singleton. You've got every weapon on the outside that you could ask for. Everything is intact. And again, you're playing at home at night against a Minnesota team that really only had.
This one end.
What's that?
Did the Vulcan, the last one?
Yeah, Krylov versus Volkan Ozdemir just finished. Krylov, it went to decision, but Krylov should score a ton of points.
Yeah, that was. I was cheering for whatever his name is, the guy who came out really strong, and like the other guy looked like he was like gonna fall over, and then he just did not attack anymore.
Yeah, they both gassed pretty hard. Like Ozdemir's so tired he could barely stand up after the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're prize picks. What is happening, everybody? It's time for week 7 of the NFL season. And as per usual, on Saturdays, Neil and I are breaking down the slate, going through all of our favorite tournament plays, the best angles for GPPs, the best stacks, anything you guys could think of that might relate to a tournament. We're probably going to be discussing it here. So while you come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're sponsored by Prize Picks today. Neil, how's your weekend going, and how are you looking forward to this slate?
Weekend's not going great right now. I have, I believe, 17 remaining lineups in this MMA card. After O's whatever just lost that fight, I was cheering for him. Came out strong, lost it all. That was not that fun for me. So I'm basically cheering for my lineups that nobody has fought yet in MMA. So that's not going great. But this slate, obviously, I love every football slate. So I'm excited for week 7.
Yeah, Neil. Well, the other thing too is because Neil crushes Showdown so hard, Neil could really get excited for like, oh look, the Bears are playing the Commanders on a Thursday. So
Yep.
Neil at least has a significant edge to make money on those kind of Showdown slates. It's hard for me to get as excited for the Showdown slates as I do for the main NFL slates, but I know Neil, you love all things football as you should, because Neil has had a millionaire maker win. He's had a number of big wins in Showdown contests. So if you guys aren't following Neil on Twitter, go ahead and do that at PlayerQ DFS. And Neil also has a really good podcast where he talks about different DFS stuff and interviews people. So follow Neil on Twitter. But let's talk about this NFL slate. And we're getting into a point of the year where we're starting to see some really lopsided spreads. We're starting to see some a trade happen, which almost never happens in football. I can't remember the last time we've seen a significant fantasy football trade that actually has fantasy impact at this point of the season. But we do have one for this weekend where Christian McCaffrey, I'm sure everybody knows by now, but Christian McCaffrey traded yesterday for draft picks to the San Francisco 49ers. So as a result, in the San Francisco game, it's still a little bit unknown what his role is actually going to be in that game. But then for Carolina, potential value as far as the running backs go. And people got really upset at me on Twitter because I pointed out that the line for the game basically didn't move at the time of the trade. So what ended up happening was the Panthers were 10.5-point underdogs against the Bucs. They traded for Christian McCaffrey, or they traded Christian McCaffrey away. The books took down the lines for the Chiefs 49ers game and for the Panthers Buccaneers game. For the 49ers Chiefs game, it reopened exactly the same. For the Panthers Bucs game, it moved 1 point. So that was more or less how the books decided that they were valuing Christian McCaffrey. And then there was some betting afterwards that induced some more line movement. But people were really upset at it. And I didn't even, I have an opinion on this, which is but I didn't infuse any opinions. I just posted information. And people are like, you're an idiot. Like, why? Because
why do you hate running backs, Greg?
Yeah. Like it was, I didn't even post any, it was just, there's no opinion. I just posted a fact on it. But I am curious, any kind of read as to what Christian McCaffrey's role is going to be with San Francisco this week. I just assume that he's unplayable. He's not going to play enough, but I was wondering if you had a different angle on it because it's such a big storyline.
That's yeah, I don't know that I would say he's unplayable. I guess I'm kind of waiting on news there. You might be right though, that it's not, he's probably not playing a full workload yet, not really assimilated to the Niners system. So that's probably correct. I'll have to wait and see if more news comes out, because the latest that I've read on it is that he is probably going to play, but I did not get the sense that he's going to be like a full go yet.
And by the way, just so people are aware also, because there's the note on DraftKings right now, very frequently when players get traded, the points just don't count. But Christian McCaffrey has been traded for San Francisco. He will not accrue points for Carolina. He will accrue points for San Francisco. Like the dumbest note ever. I don't even know, like, why does it matter which team the points count for? But if people were unsure if his points are going to count this weekend, they will. And that is still an important overall point on the slate. So let's start talking about the quarterbacks and some of the stacks that we're going to be trying to build some of our lineups around. So starting at the quarterback position, we have for this weekend, once again, fairly spread out ownership, but even more so than usual. So starting with DraftKings, Joe Burrow is projected for 10.5% ownership, and he's the chalkiest QB on the slate. Then we got Prescott, Geno Smith, Derek Carr, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, all projected around 9%. How are you looking at this position when the ownership is so flat this weekend?
I mean, we've still got some pretty nice leverage spots. As you said, Joe Burrow, 10.5% ownership, 12% top stack odds. We've got Justin Herbert, 9.5% ownership, 13% top stack odds. So, and Tom Brady, 6% ownership, 8.5% top stack odds. So I think I'm going to be kind of targeting some of these spots that we just have positive leverage. I think a lot of my exposure to quarterbacks is going to be just among those guys who have the higher top stack odds in our top stacks tool. I'm going to be, obviously I can always go to In some spots, I'll go to some of these lower owned guys that have lower top stack odds, but have positive leverage. But a lot of my exposure, I think, is just going to be to those top guys, to Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. I think those guys are going to be a good portion of my portfolio, to be honest.
Yeah, and by the way, because people are asking about the quarterback situation in Denver with Russell Wilson out, it does look like Brett Rypien is going to be starting at quarterback. And thankfully, this is not a Monday or Sunday night football game this week. They finally gotten the Broncos off of Monday or Sunday night football, so that is not going to be something you have to worry about, at least not for prime time. But yeah, that's who's going to in all likelihood be starting a quarterback for them. Now, in terms of the quarterbacks also at the high end, because these guys also, different price ranges. Is there anybody who's a pay up option that you view as being a good contrarian option on this slate? Because we got Lamar Jackson picking up some ownership. Well, actually, I should rephrase this question. Do you view Patrick Mahomes as being a good leverage option? Because he's the only spend up option that is not picking up ownership.
Yeah, actually, I just said it in chat that I missed him. When I listed off those 5 quarterbacks, I meant to include Patrick Mahomes here, projected for under 4% ownership with a greater than 8% chance of being the top stack in Kansas City. So yeah, I mean, anytime you can get Patrick Mahomes at really low ownership, it's a great spot. I mean, he can put up, 30, 40 fantasy points pretty easily against any defense. This Niners defense is no different. The Chiefs have a 25.25 implied team total, one of the higher team totals on the slate, and obviously they can exceed that any given week. So yeah, I like Patrick Mahomes quite a bit.
Yeah, and then by the way, same goes for FanDuel. He's only projected for 5% ownership, so fairly low ownership. Patrick Mahomes on both sides, 4 and 5%. I think that he makes sense because we know that all of the upside there is generally in Chiefs stacks and Patrick Mahomes individually. But I also want to ask you about Tom Brady. He's projected for 6% ownership over on DK. FanDuel, he is projected for 7% ownership. So also not a crazy popular play at quarterback, but he is such an easy matchup against the Carolina Panthers. But I'm wondering in this kind of scenario, how much will you account for the fact that the Buccaneers are now very significant 13-point favorites? The total is 38.5 points because the Panthers are basically not expected to score in this game. So number one, how would this impact how you view the upside of Buccaneers stacks? And how would it impact your want to get run back options?
So my preference would be a game where the other team is also expected to score points. It's definitely a downgrade for me when the other team can't score at all. But, still, if Tampa Bay is going to rout the Panthers, they're still going to obviously have to put up points themselves. So I still like Tampa Bay quite a bit. I like that all of the Tampa Bay pass catching options are looking like they're going a little bit under-owned in our tools as well. You can obviously throw in Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Kate Otten, are there any others that look great? Anyway, I'm going to play Tom Brady regardless. Whether I want to go to a Carolina run back, probably not. I'm probably not going to require a bring back from the Panthers. Maybe DJ Moore is in play. The Panthers do have some cheap options on the comeback now with, Shi Smith, LaVisca. All of these guys are going to be in play now just at very low salary because they have traded Christian McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson, and these guys are kind of ascending on the depth chart. And they should be needing to throw the ball. So I might not require it. This might be one spot where I go in and use groups in Fantasy Cruncher where I say, if I use Tom Brady, give a boost to these pass catchers, but not necessarily require it.
That's exactly what I'm going to do is I'll go in and I'll give a boost to those guys, but I don't want every single one of my Tampa Bay lineups to have a run back because the total in this game is 38.5. The final score might be 38-0. And that just might be where all of the points come in this game. And something else that's kind of telling, PJ Walker, his over under for passing yards, 156.5, the lowest I've ever seen for a quarterback. And maybe it's built into the idea that maybe he won't play the entire game, but that's as low as I've ever seen for a quarterback, especially in one where the game script seems to be setting up fairly well for a team to have to throw the football. But Tom Brady, I'm going to be making also probably only double stacks with him. I wouldn't be willing to stack Tom Brady with only one of his wide receivers. Is that the same for you, or are you okay with him just with one of his wide receiver options?
Yeah, last week kind of scared me off a little bit, the double stacks, but not enough that I'm actually going to go away from them. I think I'm still going to require the double stack with Tom Brady. Obviously, it can work out. He can throw 3 touchdowns to Mike Evans, and you'll regret having that second wide receiver. But usually you want that extra correlation, that extra spot that you don't have to worry about in your lineup. So I think with Tom Brady not really running the ball at all, I think the double stack is still my preference.
Yeah, I like the comment that Heinous One has in the in the YouTube chat where it says Carolina has an XFL quarterback, an interim head
XFL
coach,
legend.
a running back out committee, only one legit wide receiver, no need to tank. They will lose regardless. It kind of goes hand in hand, though. Like the reason that they're tanking is because this is what the roster is. The reason the roster is what it is the reason they're tanking. It's just a bad team all around. But yeah, it's not like they're going to be doing anything crazy where it's like, oh, we're running the water boy offense. We're kneeling all the second half to not score points. Like they'll manage to not score points on their own in this spot.
Let's throw some respect on PJ Walker's name, though. He is an XFL legend, not just an XFL quarterback.
Was he MVP of the XFL?
I actually don't know. Probably he was. I think their best player. Let's see.
XFL MVP. I know you have an XFL hat.
I do. I wish I was wearing it right now. I don't even know where it is.
People don't know, but you were the Rob Lowe of the XFL. Neil would go to the games and you just have the XFL hat on the sideline.
Yeah.
All right. XFL.
Yes, he was the MVP.
XFL MVP. That gets you an over-under of 156.5 passing yards once you make it to the NFL.
Yeah, I can't believe that low passing yard total. That's insane.
Yeah, it's very low. I actually did bet the over on it just because the number was so low. Like we have a fairly shitty projection on him. I'm not playing him in DFS at all, but we have him projected for 180 passing yards. I'm like, that's enough for me to bet the over on a 156 mark.
Yeah.
As far as the other quarterbacks go on the slate, are there any contrarian options that are really standing out to you?
I mean, as we said, Patrick Mahomes is actually kind of contrarian. So he stands out as somebody that I like a little bit. I did like Russell Wilson a little bit. Now he's ruled out. I don't know if I'm going to go to Brett Ripien. I don't know if I'm that brave. Maybe in a spot or two, but probably not going to go too much to Brett Ripien. Maybe Ryan Tannehill came up on the show yesterday a little bit because the Tennessee pass catchers look great. We've got Treylon Burks on the IR, so Robert Woods really pops in our tools. Nick Westbrook-Akine pops in our tools. So we do have some options among Tennessee pass catchers that make them look kind of interesting against the Colts. It's a decent matchup. The Colts are 18th against the pass in terms of DVOA, so not the best matchup in the world, but you can certainly go to some Ryan Tannehill with these pass catching options being a little bit condensed and fairly cheap. I think they make Tannehill make some sense with some stacks.
But by the way, also something about the total on these games. There are very few games that are expected to be high scoring this week. So before we talked about, we like Patrick Mahomes as being a lower owned QB. That game is a 48.5 total. That's the second highest on the slate. A lot of these games, Tampa Bay, Carolina, 38.5 point total. Tennessee, Indianapolis, 41.5. Jets, Broncos, 37.5. Washington, Green Bay, 41.5. Jaguars, Giants, 43.5. And then we also got teams on the buys now. So there aren't that many games that, at least on paper, have great game scoring environments. That's something else that kind of makes me like Patrick Mahomes, even if the matchup against the 49ers isn't ideal. But how do you like Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers offense? Is there reason to get to that as a contrarian play on the other side? Because this is a game that is the second highest total on the slate, and the 49ers are favored.
Yeah, I was just thinking that is actually sort of an interesting spot. It's actually a little bit over-owned, coming in at 3.8% ownership in our top stacks, to a 3% chance of being the top stack, but it's close enough that I think that I will have some interest in Jimmy Garoppolo. We don't really know how Christian McCaffrey affects that offense, and he might be limited, so maybe we don't want to go to Christian McCaffrey a lot, but he still could help that offense move, and maybe he's used sort of as a decoy in some spots, and they can open up some passing lanes for George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. So I have a little bit of interest in Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that he's somebody that I'm not going to be going overboard on Jimmy Garoppolo, but it is, one of those game environments where a lot of points could be scored against a not great Chiefs defense, 28th against the pass. So yeah, it's a pretty good spot for Jimmy Garoppolo. I still see the Chiefs are favored, right?
No. The 40, or is it the?
The
Chiefs are favored. Right? The Chiefs are favored by 1 point. But either way, very, very, very tight line right now. So
yeah,
a game that's close to a coin flip. And we still have the 49ers and the Chiefs. Neither of the offense is picking up all that much ownership. Like we said there, sub 5% ownership on both FanDuel and DraftKings for Mahomes and Jimmy Garoppolo. Just aren't that many other great spots to target. And once again, one of the other spots that's going to be popular, Geno Smith. He's picking up some ownership now, 9% for him. Justin Herbert also at 9%. For me personally, I know that these are games that people are going to want to get to that are going to be fairly popular. I'm getting to them as well, just not too much different from the field. The Chargers do look like a really good team to make stacks of. We have them being a little bit under-owned. The Seahawks as well look like a good team to stack, going a little bit over-owned. So both of them, I think, are good spots, but I don't think I'll be wildly different from the field.
I think that the Chargers are a team that I am going to be above the field. I think I'll be under the field on Geno stacks. Of course, that has bit me before, but just looking over owned right now in the top stacks tool. Whereas Justin Herbert, we are now missing XFL legend Donald Parham for the Chargers. So that means that Gerald Everett is a better option among tight ends. And then, of course, Keenan Allen is back, and we've got Mike Williams. So enough pass catching options. They should be able to score pretty easily on this Niners defense. So I think that I will be above the field on the Justin Herbert side of that game.
And then is there any other quarterback that really stands out to you, either being contrarian play or being overowned that you think makes sense for us to talk about before we move on to the running backs?
I mean, Derek Carr looks a little bit overowned, coming in at 9.4% projected ownership against this Houston team, 7% chance of being in the top stack. So a little bit overowned there. Yeah, I mean, so we talked a little bit. I said I like Justin Herbert. I just listed off, I like Joe Burrow against Atlanta. It's just a bad defense. Cincinnati should be able to put up some points. Lamar Jackson, anytime he's facing a bad, Lamar Jackson any week is a pretty good play at under 10% ownership. We've got him at 9.9% ownership, 11.5% chance of being the top stack. If I'm playing Lamar Jackson, I'm probably just doing a skinny stack. Most of the time it's going to be with Mark Andrews, but I'm going to have some Lamar stacks. They interest me. We actually have Dak neutral now. He was looking negative leverage as of when I think yesterday is the last time I talked about this game. Dak has been kind of negative leverage all week. Finally, now he's looking neutral, slight positive leverage in terms of top stack odds. I've been wanting to go there all week. I was hoping the ownership would come in a little bit lower, but he's the quarterback. It's not like a wide receiver coming back who you think maybe he's limited, maybe they're not going to go, give him the full go. Dak is going to be a full go against a bad Detroit defense. So I do have some interest in Dak. We talked about Tom Brady. It looks great. All of his pass catchers look great. Patrick Mahomes. I think we've talked about all of the most relevant options. I guess Trevor Lawrence looks like he's a little bit over on the tools, but I think I might go to some Trevor Lawrence against the Giants. He has a little bit of, at least has the ability for rushing spike weeks. So I think I might go to some Trevor Lawrence. Actually, Aaron Rodgers coming in at 2.6% projected ownership against this bad Washington defense. Hasn't really shown us much this year, but I still think he's probably got something in the tank. So I'll probably go to a little bit of Aaron Rodgers as well.
Yeah. By the way, Aaron Rodgers, I don't know that I've really actually targeted him on any slate so far this year, which is crazy to think because multiple MVPs and was one of the best fantasy quarterbacks last year. The loss of Devontae Adams, I think coming into the year, we knew it could be an issue. It's way more significant than I thought it could have been.
Yeah, they just don't look good on offense. And I don't know if it's just Devontae Adams or what's going on there, but just the lack of great pass catchers in general. They just don't seem to really have any pass catchers who are doing much. But I think that they're all capable. They also lost MVS. I don't know if that matters that much. But they've got Romeo Dobbs. They've got pass catchers who seem like they could be good at some point. Maybe one of these weeks they'll put it together at least for 1 week.
All right, let's move on to the running backs. But first, if you guys want access to projections, ownership projections, boom bust tool, top stacks tool we have for football, and not just for football. I mean, we've got tools for baseball, basketball, hockey, any DFS sport that's out there. We've got it covered over at Stokastic.com. We've got a deal right now where you can get 10 days of projections for every single sport for only $10. It's a great deal. It's good value. It's 80% off what the package would normally be. And it's a good way to test out the different data we have for different sports to see if it's something that you guys are interested in. And we have a lineup generator now, which is going to be the easiest way for you to build lineups. So you guys are short on time. You could just go to the lineup builder, you click a couple buttons, press a couple settings, and based on our simulations, it's going to shoot out lineups for you that we have projected to be plus EV. So check out all of that. But when you're signing out, use the promo code Hardwood because that is what is going to get you 10 days of all these projections for $10. Let's move on to the running backs, Neil. And I think where we have to start is with Josh Jacobs, who is probably in the best situation any running back has been in for the entire season. And what I mean by that is his workload has been massive the last couple of weeks. We're looking at a guy mid-20s carries per game, also getting work in the receiving game. The Houston defense, 28th in rush defense DVOA, near the bottom of the league. And the Raiders are at home, 7-point favorites. Everything looks perfect on paper for Josh Jacobs. He's also picking up a lot of ownership. Do you think it's warranted?
It's totally, I mean, based on our tools, it's totally warranted. And you just look at the game logs. Of course, we don't want to chase game logs, but he has just been getting such massive volume, both on the ground and in the passing game. He's 6,500. So just based on his recent volume and success, he's playing like an $8,000 running back, and he's listed at 6,500 in a very good matchup here. Against the Texans, and we have some negative leverage on Derek Carr. He's going a little bit over owned. So we have leverage on the people who are playing Derek Carr, assuming that they're not playing him frequently with Josh Jacobs. The Raiders have a 26.25 implied team total. The Texans 29th against the rush per DVOA per Football Outsiders. So yeah, it's a smash spot for Josh Jacobs. Honestly, this was one of the most surprising things I've seen in looking at the boom bust duel, seeing this 31% ownership on Josh Jacobs and seeing that we have positive leverage on that. We have him in the optimal 36% of the time. I saw that and I was like, man, Josh Jacobs, really? I guess I knew that he was doing well. I did not realize quite the extent of it until I looked at his game logs. And it's like, man, this guy is just crushing. They're giving him the ball. Did not see that coming into the year with the addition of Devontae Adams. They've got Darren Waller. They've got Hunter Renfrow. They're going to Josh Jacobs plenty. So yeah, he looks great.
Things change quick at the running back position because he's been better than a lot of the stud running backs. He's been better than Jonathan Taylor. He's been better than Dalvin Cook. He's been better than nearly everybody. And it's not just the volume, but the efficiency for Josh Jacobs. He's averaging 5.4 yards per carry and has only averaged less than 5 yards per carry in one game the entire season. And like we said, also the passing game work last week, 5 targets, the week before against Denver, 6 targets, the week before that against Tennessee, 5 targets. I mean, if we've got a guy who's going to be carrying the ball 28 times, also getting 5-6 targets in the passing game, he's getting all the red zone work, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. It's just really hard to not consider him the best play on the slate. And I know we're talking about tournaments here, but cash games, absolutely, everybody should be playing Josh Jacobs in those kind of settings. But even for tournaments, he's the most rostered running back on both FanDuel and DraftKings, and all of our tools and projections suggest that he's still under owned. So I know it's a lot of ownership, but it looks more than warranted based on some of the tools that we have here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great spot. I don't know if I'm going to be above the field there. It's a small sample size still, so I don't entirely trust it, but I don't think I'm going to be much lower than the field, most likely, just because, he's looked so great this year. It's really hard to not want to get to a good amount of Josh Jacobs. His ownership scares me just a little bit, but as I said, positive leverage. It's obviously warranted. So I might not be that far below the field, and who knows? I might end up above the field. I haven't built lineups yet. I don't really know these things until Sunday, but my guess is I'll be a little bit under the field. But he does have positive leverage, so you should probably trust the numbers and go above the field there.
Yeah, and sometimes the ownership numbers will change as we get closer to lock. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check out the live before lock show we do on Sunday. It runs for like 18 hours straight or something like that. It never ends, but it gives you all the information you need to build some winning lineups. The other real big piece of chalk in both FanDuel and DraftKings, Kenneth Walker, projected for north of 20% ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for 16% ownership. So somewhat comparable ownership numbers to Josh Jacobs. I lean much heavier towards Jacobs as being my preferential chalk running back, but where does Kenneth Walker fit into the mix for you?
Yeah, if I'm going to go to a chalk running back, I'm going to go to the one with the positive leverage instead of the one with the massive negative leverage. We've got Kenneth Walker at 25% ownership with an 11% chance of being optimal, 7% chance of booming. We have seen some running backs have some great games against this Chargers defense, but still, that ownership is just too high for Kenneth Walker for me. I think that I'd rather go to Josh Jacobs. That doesn't mean I'm not going to play any Kenneth Walker, but I might be closer to that. The 7% that we have him optimal, I think I'm going to be closer to that number than I will be to that 25% ownership. I'd prefer going to like the Dallas running backs or just other spots that I prefer.
Yeah, right now we've got Kenneth Walker as being a fairly negatively leveraged play on the slate on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So that's why not all chalk is the same, right? Because somebody messaged me earlier on Twitter and asked me, which I think is not a bad question to ask, is what's an ideal ownership percentage to be building your lineups in Fantasy Cruncher? And it's so hard to say because it's so different week to week. Because this week, for instance, Josh Jacobs rates out as a really good chalk piece for us, whereas there's going to be other weeks where somebody will be, 30, 35% owned and will be massively negatively leveraged. So obviously, if I like a real chalk piece like Josh Jacobs, my lineups are just naturally going to have more ownership, but not really the end of the world. Is just wondering, do you have any specific answer to that, or does what I said make sense to you?
Yeah, what you said makes perfect sense. It's going to change every week. There are weeks, as you said, where the chalk looks great. Your lineups are obviously going to be higher owned overall. It's not something that I give a lot of thought to the sum of my ownership in my lineups. I don't set a cap or anything like that. I know some people do. That's not how I play.
Yeah, I don't either. And like I said, it's just so hard to have a blanket rule that's going to cover every slate the same. So Josh Jacobs, really like him as a chalk play this week. And then Kenneth Walker, a little bit less so, where we have him being fairly negatively leveraged on both sites. Now, in terms of the other pay up running backs we have, or I shouldn't say the other, just the running back pay up options in general, we've got a handful of them this week. Between Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Leonard Fournette, Austin Eckler, are any of those guys priorities for you relative to your ownership? Are you going to be mixing and matching? What do you think of the pay up running backs?
Yeah, so Austin Eckler, we actually have some positive leverage on 19.2% ownership, 23% optimal at 8,300. It's a great matchup against the Seahawks. You can include him in some of your Justin Herbert stacks. I mean, he was targeted like 16 times last week. I don't remember the exact number, but he was targeted so many times by Justin Herbert last week. If he's going to be that involved in the passing game, on DraftKings in particular, or it's PPR, Austin Eckler just has a massive floor, obviously has a massive ceiling. So I actually like Austin Eckler a bit this week. Saquon coming in at 16% ownership looks like he has a little bit of negative leverage, 11% optimal. I'll probably be below the field there, just trusting the data a little bit. Joe Mixon is somebody that I think that I'm actually going to play some Joe Mixon. Even with this negative leverage, he hasn't really been as involved the past couple games, but earlier in the season he was, and I think that it's something that he could be. If they need to use him in any given game, it's not like they're afraid to use Joe Mixon. So at 7,000 against that Falcons defense, I actually think I might be close to the field's coming in at 17% ownership. My guess is that I'll be close to the field on Joe Mixon, despite we have negative leverage there. We have 11% optimal at 17% ownership. So trust the numbers, but I'm not going to here. I'm gonna go against the numbers a little bit and play a little bit more Joe Mixon. I also do, in general, I make decisions based on the boom bust tool. I also don't want all of my lineups to look too similar to everybody else who's using the same numbers. So I pick a few spots on each slate where I'm going to go against the numbers a little bit. And I think Joe Mixon is one where I might do that this weekend.
I have one kind of similar to you in that sense, and that is Jonathan Taylor. Now, we need a little bit more news here in terms of, is he going to be crazy restricted or not? Because if we find out that Jonathan Taylor is going to be on some really restrictive snap count, then it would make me feel differently. But Jonathan Taylor was the consensus #1 overall fantasy player coming into the year, and he got off to a slow start. Some of it was his fault because he was inefficient. Some of it also was Matt Ryan was terrible, and the Colts just were not able to move the football. Since Jonathan Taylor's been hurt, Matt Ryan has played more serviceably. I think he's gotten more comfortable in Indianapolis. And now we have a situation with Jonathan Taylor where he is way lower priced than we typically see him, and nobody's playing him coming off the injury. So $8,100, where he's projected for 4% ownership. Now, I know we only have him with 2% optimal odds, but once again, he's a really difficult player to project. And if I'm just looking for ceiling, it's hard to tell me that Jonathan Taylor doesn't have a ceiling at almost no ownership and the lowest price point we've seen him at in basically forever. So how do you feel about Jonathan Taylor, and are you concerned about him this week?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I mean, the Colts, they only have a 19.75 implied team total, but this Titans D is 29th against the pass, which obviously doesn't help Jonathan Taylor as much as being bad against the rush, and they are third against the rush, but it means that the Colts should be able to move the ball. Jonathan Taylor obviously has the ability to break through, from the 1 yard line, from the 2 yard line. He should have opportunities here. So, if Jonathan Taylor is a full go, which it sounds like he is, I don't hate that call at all.
Yeah, and this kind of reminds me of, let me look at the chat and see what people think about Jonathan Taylor. No real comments yet, but it does kind of make me think of, remember when Derrick Henry was struggling at the start of the year and we brought him up as a potential contrarian play and people lost their shit about it. And that was when I kind of had a feeling like, oh, he's really not going to pick up very much ownership. The only person who's talked about it is, my lanes was asking actually what we think about Jonathan Taylor. But yeah, that's my contrarian running back to pay up for this week. This is just the way that in general I like to play DFS, is looking for players that are true buy lows, because in general, I think historical pricing is a pretty good landmark for figuring out where guys should be priced. And it's just hard for me to say that because Jonathan Taylor missed a couple of games, he's a totally worse fantasy player than he was going into week 1. So that's something I'm going to be paying up for, to be contrarian with. As far as spend down options go, are there any value options that you think are being overlooked by the field to make for good tournament plays?
Yeah, I mean, so I really like Tony Pollard coming in at 3.3% projected ownership. He's 5,700 going against the Lions. Now, obviously, Ezekiel Elliott typically will get more run than Tony Pollard, but at 3.3% projected ownership in this matchup, Tony Pollard obviously has spike weeks. We've seen him involved a little bit in the passing game. It looks like they did actually line him up at wide receiver in the last game for Dallas. So we have positive leverage on Tony Pollard, 5.2% optimal. I'm probably going to be above that number on Tony Pollard. He's a player who's just getting very little ownership that I'm going to be above. And I'll actually be above the field on Ezekiel Elliott probably too. Not in the same lineup. I think I'll probably split those guys off with my group. So I'm not going to have Pollard and Elliott in the same lineup. But Zeke coming in 8.7% ownership, 12.3% optimal. I like both of the Dallas running backs. I'll take shots on both of them. Green Bay, probably both Green Bay running backs are going to be a little bit under owned for me. AJ Dillon coming in at 5,600. We have him project for 3.6% ownership, 7% optimal. Aaron Jones, 3% ownership, 3.7% optimal. So I kind of like both of these Green Bay running backs against the Commanders, who are they are fifth against the rush, but again, they're 19th against the pass. Hoping that the Packers will be able to move the ball here. I still want them to lose because they're the Packers, but I think this is a decent spot for the Packers. So I think I'm willing to go to both Packers running backs, both Cowboys running backs stand out to me. Just scrolling, scanning right here to see if anybody else that I'm missing that I really want to
While
talk
you're doing
about.
that, also, what's your level of confidence that Deontay Foreman is going to be the lead back for the Panthers? Because he's somebody who has pass catching ability. We've seen it in the past. He's been the backup to Christian McCaffrey this year, with Chuba Hubbard being more of an insignificant role in the offense, playing very limited snaps. If he's going to be on the field a bunch at 4,000, and if it's going to be a game where they're just going to get their asses kicked, maybe there's PPR upside in garbage time. I was kind of curious to ask you, and this is more of a DraftKings play than FanDuel. It's going to be hard for me to consider Foreman on a half-point PPR site. But do you see reason to think that Foreman is going to be the lead guy and just rack up some PPR points, kind of like what we've seen from McCaffrey at times this year?
Yeah, my level of confidence is low there. Yeah, I don't really know what the Panthers are going to do. I don't know what the Panthers are trying to do. Are they trying to win this game? I'm not all that confident in general in this Panthers team. I don't love either of them, to be honest. Like from a season long standpoint, people are rushing to the wave where, we gotta, they no longer have CMC, so we got to pick up the backup. Are the Panthers even going to score any points this year? I'm not that confident in it. So I don't love either of them. Foreman is my preferred option. I think he's likely to be the lead back. I think that has been the expectation. We actually have positive leverage on Foreman. He's 4,000. We've got him project for only 2.1% ownership, 6.6% optimal. I don't know if that holds that ownership number. I could see that going up just because that seems low for a guy that everybody's talking about right now. But that's where we have him at currently. So we have some positive leverage there. I don't know that I'm going to be going to a ton of Deontay Foreman. Are you thinking that you would actually go to Chuba Hubbard as a pivot there?
No, I don't think it's necessary if Foreman's only going to be 2% owned. Where I think it would make sense to me is if Foreman ends up being like 20% owned or something, which doesn't seem like it's going to be the case. If it was in that kind of scenario, I'd be like, hey, maybe it's not him and it's Chuba Hubbard, but it doesn't look like it matters because the ownership is so low. But even if it comes up a little bit, I don't think Foreman is going to be all that popular. I think he makes sense as a plug-in in more chalky lineups. So if you guys are building a lineup and maybe you really like the really chalky Seahawks, for instance, you want Josh Jacobs in the lineup, you want Austin Eckler as a run back or, something along those lines. If you're trying to reduce the ownership share, that's where I think you could plug in Foreman, and he's so low owned, it kind of doesn't matter what the rest of the ownership is in the lineup because so few people are playing him right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call out. Let me throw one more at you. Brian Robinson, they haven't really used him much as a pass catcher, which hurts him a lot. I think that he does have that ability, though. I think that he is a capable pass catcher. So maybe the Commanders at some point, now Carson Wentz is out, maybe they use him a little bit differently. Going up against this Packers defense, too, that is worst in the league against the rush in terms of rush DVOA. So I think that I'm going to have a little bit of interest in Brian Robinson, not getting a ton of ownership, coming in at 1.2% projected ownership at 5,500 against this Packers defense. Think you have any interest in Brian Robinson?
It's tough for me to get there because they're playing 3 running backs right now, and he doesn't really have a pass role. Gibson appears to be better. The other thing too is I feel like at this point, if you're not playing Brian Robinson, you kind of feel like a dick if you're Washington. He's got this great story. Right. He's coming back from being shot, and then
exactly. So they have to give him 25 carries.
And then he comes back. How does someone be like, hey, you lost your job because somebody else played better while you were shot?
Yeah.
So it's also this. It's just to me a team too where there's reason for them to play all 3 running backs because none of them are really standing out. it does seem like Brian Robinson is the number one priority, but I'd actually like him to be a little bit cheaper on DraftKings and FanDuel.
Yeah, I would prefer it too, but I think that if we were cheaper, it'd probably get more ownership. So that is the other side of that
Fair.
coin. But I don't know that I'm going to get to a ton of Brian Robinson, but my guess is I'll actually end up above the field there.
Let's see. I mean, he's very low owned. I'm
Yeah.
curious. I ran crunches earlier for DraftKings and FanDuel. He appeared in. Let me sort by running. He appeared in none of them on DraftKings or FanDuel. So it seems like he's somebody I'm not going to end up getting to. And by the way, Deontay Foreman landed in about 8% of my lineup. So a good amount over the field relative to the 2% mark, at least in the lineups I ran earlier. So let's move on over to the wide receivers next. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. And if you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, if you do it by using the link below in the description box, you're going to get $100 up to in your first deposit bonus. So you deposit $100, they give you 100, they match it. But if you don't want to deposit 100, you deposit 50, they'll match that as well. So if you're signing up, click on the link below because there's no reason to start your account with no free money when you could get some free money. So click on the link when signing up at Prize Picks. And we've got all the tools you need over at Stokastic.com to build winning player prop cards over at Prize Picks. Now let's talk about wide receivers on the slate. And when I was running my lineups earlier, one player that popped up a whole bunch for me that you mentioned earlier was Robert Woods, one of my favorite overall value options on the slate, both FanDuel and DraftKings. He popped up a whole bunch. Now, I know that we don't feel great about Ryan Tannehill being his quarterback, but the pass catching options have been so banged up for Tennessee that I think that there is extra opportunity for Robert Woods, who, while he didn't have a massive fantasy game the last time they played against Washington, they were on a bye week last week. He was targeted 8 times. That's a pretty significant workload. I'm going to look to buy low on Robert Woods here.
Yeah, the price is right. The matchup is fine. The Colts defense 18th against the pass, decent enough. And he just really pops in our tools. We just see Robert Woods coming in at 6% ownership, 11% optimal. That's all I really need to see to want to play some Robert Woods at 5,500. It's a good enough matchup against the Colts. That's all you really need to say. I mean, Robert Woods, if he's going to be this low owned, I'm going to have some interest, and I'm going to be stacking him with Ryan Tannehill. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine also coming in at 0.6% projected ownership, 5.7% optimal. So that's some pretty massive positive leverage on Westbrook-Ikhine. Of course, it would shock nobody if he has like one catch for 7 yards, but you know, he's just a player that has some upside and is showing in the tools. So I think I'm going to be going to both of these guys for the Titans.
Yeah, no, I'm totally on board. And it's actually probably going to be something that when I'm building my lineups and putting more rules into Fantasy Cruncher, it's probably going to force me on some more Ryan Tannehill. And not that he's somebody I'm excited to play, but the quarterback position is so much about who they correlate with than the quarterbacks themselves. So I'm probably going to end up on more Ryan Tannehill just as we're talking through this. I want to ask you about the chalk at the position as well, because that right now is CeeDee Lamb. He is projected for north of 20% ownership. Over on DK, the most popular wide receiver, and by the way, the only wide receiver on DraftKings projected for more than 20% ownership. And same for FanDuel, he's projected for 20.1% ownership, and nobody else even projected for north of 16%. So Lamb, chalk option with Dak Prescott coming back. How do you see this working out for him, and is the ownership warranted?
Yeah, I think the ownership was warranted. I said I actually like Dak this week. I think I'm going to be going making some Dak lineups. Hope that he can, you know, kind of kick off some of that rust. CeeDee Lamb 6,800 playing against the Lions. He's only projected for I say only. He's projected for 21% ownership, 25% chance to be an optimal. So we have positive leverage on CeeDee Lamb. It's about as good of a matchup as you can hope for. Against the Lions, who are 32nd against the pass and 31st against the rush. Yeah, they are the worst defense in the league. I think it's pretty safe to say. I'm going to be going to plenty of CeeDee Lamb. He's the top pass catching option for the Cowboys. I think I'm going to be double stacking when I play Dak. CeeDee Lamb is obviously going to be a big part of those stacks, but yeah, I'll play him as a one-off elsewhere as well. He just looks great against this Lions defense.
Yeah, so something else too that I think just overall makes CeeDee Lamb project well in both FanDuel and DraftKings, and by the way, I'm talking about just relative to points per dollar projection, is he's still kind of priced as if Cooper Rush is the quarterback. You know, like
Right.
we don't typically
Exactly.
see CeeDee Lamb being this cheap, so you're getting a few $100s in price reduction here, and that does make him project pretty well. A reason that I'll be getting to him. Who are the other wide receivers that are really standing out to you? Anybody that if you think you were running lineups right now that would really be a core play that we haven't talked about yet?
I mean, we've talked about both of the Tampa guys. Godwin and Evans, I think, are certainly interesting. Keenan Allen looks like he's going way under-owned. His first game back from injury, coming in at just 6.2% ownership, 14% optimal. If that holds, I'm going to like that a lot. I'm planning on playing some Justin Herbert stacks. So we'll be part of those stacks. I'll also play him individually. He looks pretty great. Jamar Chase looks a little bit over-owned. I'm still going to be getting there. I don't know if I'm going to be getting to the 17% that the field is getting there, but we are missing some of our top options at wide receiver this week. So Jamar Chase at 8,200, 17% ownership. I think that I will have at least some, I'll probably be pretty close to the field. I'm planning on playing some Joe Burrow stacks. So Jamar Chase will obviously be a part of those. Brandon Cooks, he's one of those guys I always have trouble playing. I see a little bit of positive leverage on Brandon Cooks. I still don't know how much over the field I'm going to be getting there. He's coming in at 10.6% ownership, 12% optimal. How do you feel about Cooks?
I kind of prefer getting to Dameon Pierce, I think, if I'm building out lineups. And I try to avoid getting to too much of running backs and wide receivers in the same lineup if it's not stacked with their quarterback. So I got some more exposure of Pierce. I was around the field on Cooks though. So let's see, what is his projected ownership right now? His projected ownership is 11. I got to him in 12% in the run I did this morning. So fairly neutral to me. It's not something I think I'd be all that much different on. And by the way, it's actually funny. I didn't even do this intentionally, but just looking through our numbers, we have Brandon Cooks 10.6% ownership and being optimal 12% of the time. That's just the number I landed on. So it seems like things are pointing to I'm going to end up with him a little over 10%.
Okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable. I'm probably not going to be too far above that either. Probably close to that number. I mentioned Keenan Allen, should probably say Mike Williams, also 7.4% projected ownership against this bad Seattle defense, 9% optimal. So some positive leverage on Mike Williams. Noah Brown actually looks great for the Cowboys against the Lions. Same matchup, obviously, as CeeDee Lamb. He's only 4,400. We have him optimal 9% of the time, owned 3.4% of the time. So I do like Noah Brown. I'll probably go to some Hunter Renfrow and Devontae Adams, some leverage on Josh Jacobs. Probably not playing all three of them in the same lineup, but I might do some lineups that have these wide receivers, at least one of these wide receivers without Josh Jacobs. Even though I'm not going to be playing a lot of Derek Carr, I think that I'll probably have some lineups with Hunter Renfrow or Devontae Adams as one-offs. Michael Pittman, I talked about how much I like those Tennessee stacks. I think I'm going to be playing some Tannehill stacks. I think Pittman makes sense as a comeback. And you could even play him with Matt Ryan. I've seen a little chatter in chat about playing Matt Ryan. Yeah, he's in a great spot against the Titans defense as well. You could play some Matt Ryan stacks, and you could obviously include Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce in those lineups. We talked about how much we like Patrick Mahomes. If you're going to play some Patrick Mahomes, it obviously makes some sense to play some Marquez Valdes-Scantling at 4.9% projected ownership, 5.1% optimal. I think that I'm willing to be above the field on Valdes-Scantling. I can stack him with Patrick Mahomes, and then obviously Juju as well, coming in at 4.6% ownership, 5.1% optimal. So very, pretty neutral leverage on these guys, but if you're going to be playing some Mahomes, I think I'm going to be double stacking Mahomes. I'm not just doing like Mahomes and Kelsey. So I'm going to have these guys in my Mahomes lineups. I might even have some that have both of them, which is what I have been doing. Hasn't worked out yet where I play both of the two receivers from the Chiefs, but I think that it could, at least in theory, work out one of these weeks. So I'll be going there. Tyler Boyd is only 5,300, 2.7% projected ownership, 4.8% optimal. Talked about how I like those Burrow stacks against the Falcons. I'll go to some Tyler Boyd. These are the guys that are standing out. I guess Russell Gage, actually, you could throw him into some of those Tampa stacks as well at 2.2% ownership, 4.6% optimal. Do you have anybody else that is standing out to you as somebody's going to be a big part of your lineups?
So I wanted to point something else out. If anybody's looking at the data and tools on the website right now, it's not totally updated for the Broncos situation. It will be soon. But, right now, guys, like Courtland Sutton looks really good. That is almost certainly not going to be the case tomorrow. Right. So if anybody's building lineups well in advance, I just wanted to point that out as something else. But other than that, I think you've kind of hit on most of the stuff that's important. Let me look through my lineups that I built again and see if anybody else really came up significantly. I think DJ Moore could potentially have some utility as a run back just because he's so cheap and so good as a wide receiver. I don't think he's a bad buy low option. I'm not going to force a run back in any Tampa Bay stacks, but the two that looked like they're coming up most commonly for me in lineups that did have a run back were DJ Moore and Deontay Foreman. So DJ Moore, we talked about him briefly at the top. It's just how much do we trust PJ Walker? Not that much. It's why I'm not going to force a run back in those lineups. But DJ Moore is underpriced, and I think is a contrarian GPP to play to get to just because of the talent.
Yeah, I think that DJ Moore is a talented wide receiver, despite what is being said in chat about him. I think I'll probably play some DJ Moore. LaVisca coming in at 0.6% projected ownership, 2.2% optimal. All of these, I mean, Shai Smith coming in at 1.1%. All of these guys should have elevated roles. I'm still not, as we've both said, not requiring the run back, but maybe I'll play some of these guys. Maybe one of these guys will make it into a few of my Brady lineups as a bring back, but I don't love any of them. Obviously, DJ Moore is the most talented, the most likely to see a lot of opportunities, and he's only 4,900. So I think DJ Moore makes some sense.
Let's talk about the tight ends now, and the tight end position. We've got a lot of the high end guys going this week. Some weeks we don't really have any guys to pay up for, but this weekend we've got Travis Kelce, we've got Mark Andrews, we've got George Kittle in an offense with a lot more weapons than it had in the past. So starting by talking about the pay up options, how do you like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews as potential pay up options, or do you think you're going to potentially be saving money more at tight end this weekend?
No, I like them quite a bit as pay up options. I think that what's his name? Dulcich from Denver is going to look a lot worse once we have Russ out of the lineup as well. So that's one of those paid on. I'll still probably have some Dulcich, but he's actually already down to 8.7% optimal. We had him at 25% optimal yesterday. So this maybe this is already accounting for Russ being out with the Dulcich optimal. But yeah, I think that Mark Andrews looks great. 13.7% projected ownership, 13.8% optimal. I said how much I like Lamar Jackson. I think it makes a lot of sense to skinny stack Lamar Jackson in some spots with Mark Andrews. I'll be doing plenty of that. Definitely interested there. Travis Kelce, again, I'm going to want to be playing a lot of Patrick Mahomes lineups. Travis Kelce coming in at under 6% ownership with a 7.5% chance of being optimal. Looks great at 8,000. Obviously, the price tag is very high relative to at tight end. You get guys like Dulcich at 2,500, so you can save so much money by going to those cheap guys at tight end. But we just saw Travis Kelce score 4 touchdowns. Even when they weren't throwing the ball to him much, they were throwing the ball to him in the red zone. So we know that he has that upside. And of course, he has games where he's going to get 100 yards too. It's not always, he's not just an end zone threat. So Travis Kelce at 8,000. I'm going to be playing Patrick Mahomes. I'll be playing Kelce in some of those lineups, and then also as a one-off elsewhere. Kyle Pitts is a guy who I'm going to keep losing money as a result of. He's 4,300. I'm going to be going right back to Kyle Pitts. Again, Cincinnati, 8.6% projected ownership, 16.5% optimal. So it's hard for me not to like Kyle Pitts as well.
Yeah. So talking about Kyle Pitts, and by the way, this guy's just been a nightmare, right? Nobody wants anything to do with Kyle Pitts, the tight end position. I already know people are going to be upset when they're listening back to this later, but look at some of the other tight ends that are priced around him. And regardless of what you think about Kyle Pitts, here are the other tight ends that are priced around him on DK this week. David Njoku, Robert Tonyan, Gerald Everett. Those are the other guys in this mid 4K range, and all of them are picking up comparable ownership. I still think Kyle Pitts is the most talented of all those guys. I'm not saying I'm going to go stake all my lineups on Kyle Pitts this weekend, but I do think that he warrants more ownership than what he's getting just because the tight end position in that mid-range is fairly difficult to fill. So it is a week that I think it makes sense to spread at tight end. There's not really one guy that I'm like, oh, that is the guy for me. Actually, in the lineups that I built, I didn't get more than 16% of any one tight end. So it was definitely a little bit of a spread for me at the position. But I do think that Kyle Pitts is still somebody that's worth being a little bit overweight too.
Yeah, we're on the same page on Kyle Pitts. And then I'll throw out Gerald Everett. I talked about we have XFL legend Donald Parham out for this game, which only helps Gerald Everett. I'm already playing some Justin Herbert lineups. I'll play some Gerald Everett in those lineups. I'll also play him as a one-off in some spots. I just think that he's a talented tight end, and he's got Justin Herbert throwing him the ball against a bad Seattle defense. So Everett is going to be one of my favorite tight ends on this slate. Dalton Schultz in this matchup with the Lions looks pretty good. 5.5% projected ownership, 9.7% optimal. Hayden Hurst, the matchup with the Falcons. There's actually a lot of good tight end options this week. I actually think this is a week where I'm probably going to have more frequently than usual. I'm going to have some double tight end lineups. A lot of people just don't want that. A lot of people put in rules that say you can only play one tight end. I actually think that this is a week that it makes a lot of sense to play tight ends. What do you think about that?
I personally don't really care. Like,
I don't.
I just build my lineups.
That's true.
Whatever comes
I'm
out
the
being
same way,
opt.
but
Yeah,
I could see it happening more often just because so many of them look really good this week.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's just, I want to play the best guys. And sometimes it just happens to be tight ends. Sometimes it isn't. Like the position to me is a little bit irrelevant. In general, yes, tight ends are not as good of fantasy options as wide receivers. But let's say there's a game, just for instance, the Ravens are playing the Chiefs. It's not unrealistic to think Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce are the best two pass catching options in that game. Like sometimes that's just kind of who the better players are. Sometimes I might have a Cowboys stack against the Lions this week where I have Dalton Schultz as a tight end, and the best run back option might very well be TJ Hawkinson in some of those lineups. So it's not anything I set rules for or anything.
Yeah, it's not something that I set rules for. I'm not trying to say that I'm going to like try to force in more tight ends. I just think that they project so well point per dollar this week. Of course, we're missing some of the high end options, like Cooper Kupp is not on the slate, Justin Jefferson, so we don't need the salary savings quite as much. But maybe it'll make some sense to have some lineups. My guess is that I'll have more lineups than usual that have multiple tight ends in them, just because these guys do project so well point per dollar.
All right. That is going to bring us to the end of the tight end. So we're towards the end of the show now. If you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. But now, Neil, let's talk about if we're building one lineup in a tournament and we had to make one stack in it. I want to know who you would be going towards. I have a feeling based on some of the stuff we talked about earlier that you and I are going to be the same, because I'm looking at my highest projected lineup right now, and it's a lot of players you talked about. So I'll let you go first, and I'm almost positive that we're going to land on something similar here.
I mean, there are a few in contention for me here. It's probably Patrick Mahomes, though, playing some of those Chief stacks for me at 3.8% ownership. But there are a few others that I would consider. Tampa Bay as well. I would consider the Chargers, maybe the Bengals. I don't know. There are a few stacks here that I would consider going to. Is it the Chiefs for you as well?
That was going to be my contrarian stack, but I kept one in my back pocket just in case.
Okay.
Justin Herbert to Keenan Allen, because we have Justin Herbert picking up a lot of ownership, and like in the top stacks, so it appears to be warranted. But how can we differentiate some Seahawks Chargers game stacks when that's a game picking up a lot of ownership? At least as of right now, it looks like the answer is Keenan Allen, who I get there's some concerns with him coming off the injury. In general, players do have lower ownership when they are returning from injuries, but we care more about the upside than anything else when it comes to tournaments. And we've got Keenan Allen cheaper than he typically is. And not only is he cheaper, he's only picking up 6% ownership on DK, single-digit ownership on FanDuel. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Justin Herbert to Keenan Allen, we're getting exposure to the highest projected total game on the slate, but doing it in a way that's a little bit more contrarian. So that's going to be my option.
Yeah, I like that call for sure. Will McNeil says, did they seriously not touch on Otten at tight end? How is that possible? We didn't touch on a lot of tight ends that I actually do like this week. I mean, we didn't touch on George Kittle at all. I have some interest there, but Cade Otten, yes, it is certainly in play. He's going, we have projected for just 7.2% ownership, 9.1% optimal. We talked about how much we like those Tom Brady stacks. Cade Otten is going to be in some of those stacks for me as well at 2,700. There's so many tight ends that I want to play this week. So yeah, we skipped over him, but yes, Cade Otten is a solid play this week.
Yeah, what's kind of hard about the tight end position is, like I was saying, when I'm looking through my lineups, I'm so flat right now in my builds. Like I don't even know how to be like, hey, here's 10 tight ends that I have around 10% exposure to. That's kind of what my lineups look like right now. So the one that I am most overweight to at the moment is Kyle Pitts, but it's still something I'm fairly flat to overall. It's a position I just don't think anybody really stands out this week. We don't have one guy that's projected to be, like crazy positively leveraged. I'll pull up right now the leverage tool. We've got Kyle Pitts being a little bit under-owned, Gerald Everett being a little bit under-owned, and we know some of the concerns that come with Kyle Pitts this year and just his overall uninvolvement in the passing game. But I'm gonna be spread thin at tight end this week. I don't think it's a position where, like, at running back, I really like Josh Jacobs. At wide receiver, I like Keenan Allen. I don't have one guy that's like, this is my core play at tight end.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say that that's because I actually like so many of them. It's a different than usual, where it's like there are some weeks where it's like I don't want to play any of these tight ends. To me, it's more like there are a lot of tight ends that just have positive leverage this week. So I think for me, I'm going to be playing probably a lot of these guys. And as I said, I'm going to have some lineups. I would guess, I haven't built my lineups, but I would guess I'm going to have some double tight end lineups just because, they look better relative to the cheap wide receivers. And at tight end, we have guys like Kate Otten, Foster Moreau, who are their salaries are lower than wide receivers can be on DraftKings. So I think that there are just so many tight ends that are in play for me this week.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for us. Thank you very much for watching. If you're not done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the other content we have on the slate. I'm going to be on NBA Live before lock today. If you guys aren't watching that, enjoy the football slate tomorrow and have a great rest of the weekend.